You won't believe this. Before I even tell you what happened today, let me just say, this changes everything you thought you knew about Europe's so-called fight against Russia. I'm Andrew Meet Rich, former analyst for a state-run media outlet, now independent truth-teller, and what I'm about to expose will shock you to your core. We've got two massive stories breaking simultaneously that reveal the complete hypocrisy and dangerous vulnerability of Europe. First, Germany is literally falling apart under its own military ambitions while being completely dependent on China for the very weapons they want to use against Russia. Second, the European Union continues pouring billions into Putin's war machine while lecturing the world about standing with Ukraine. The level of deception here is absolutely staggering. And here's the kicker. While European leaders were meeting with Trump and Zelensky in Washington yesterday, pretending to be tough on Russia, their own countries were quietly importing Russian gas worth more than the aid they send to Ukraine. You see the pattern, right? This isn't just incompetence. This is systematic betrayal of everything they claim to stand for. If you want the truth, not just the headlines the mainstream media feeds you, hit that like button right now, because tomorrow the news could change everything, and you need to know what's really happening before it's too late. Subscribe now because we're building an honest English-speaking news community here, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's start with Germany's absolutely catastrophic military situation. Chancellor Friedrich Merz wants to turn Germany into Europe's leading military power, right? Sounds impressive until you dig into the details. Germany is now spending $88 billion on defense, making it the fourth largest military spender in the world. They've promised hundreds of billions more through 2029. But here's where it gets insane. Germany's entire military build-up is built on a foundation of Chinese materials. Titanium for fighter jets, processed in China, heat-resistant metals for engines, China controls that too. The tungsten cores for tank-busting ammunition from Rheinmetall, guess where that comes from? China controls 90% of the global market. Wait until you hear the next part. German defense companies are literally running out of materials. Some have only weeks of supply left because Beijing has expanded its export restrictions. The German Ministry of Economic Affairs calls this very concerning, but that's the understatement of the century. You're telling me Germany wants to be a military superpower while being completely dependent on a Chinese supply chain? And now the real kicker. China controls 74% of graphite, 78% of tungsten, and over 90% of magnesium processing. Without these materials, German weapons manufacturing grinds to a halt. So while Merz talks tough about defending Europe, he's literally handing China the power to shut down German defense production overnight. This is beyond stupid. This is suicidal. Germany's Defense Industry Association is begging the government for help, saying they need American-style subsidies to reduce Chinese dependence. But here's the bitter irony. The United States already forced its defense companies to cut ties with China years ago, while Germany sleepwalked into this disaster. Let me repeat that so it sinks in. America saw this coming and acted. Germany. They built their entire military revival on Chinese goodwill, and now they're shocked, absolutely shocked, that Beijing might use this as leverage. The level of strategic incompetence here is breathtaking, but here's the shocking twist. Germany's federal budget for 2027 is already facing a €30 billion deficit, partly because of this military spending spree. Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil is talking about raising taxes on high earners, but his coalition partners are fighting him. So Germany is bankrupting itself to build weapons they can't actually produce without Chinese permission. Just imagine that for a second. Germany, supposedly the economic powerhouse of Europe, has created a military strategy that makes them more dependent on China than ever before. They're literally paying billions to make themselves weaker, and this is the country that's supposed to lead Europe's defense against Russia? The whole thing is a joke. If you're still with me, hit that like button. It tells me you want the truth, not just the headlines. But if you think this is bad, wait until you hear what's happening with European energy hypocrisy. Now let's talk about the absolutely disgusting hypocrisy of European Union energy policy. While Ursula von der Leyen and other European leaders publicly condemn Russia and demand more sanctions, guess what they're doing behind closed doors? They're importing Russian liquefied natural gas worth €4.5 billion in just the first half of this year. That's 29% more than last year. You heard that right. European gas imports from Russia actually increased while they were lecturing the world about supporting Ukraine. In 2024, Russia still supplied 19% of all EU gas imports. These aren't old contracts they can't get out of. These are active, ongoing business relationships that fund Putin's war machine. Here's where it gets even worse. The EU imported 21.9 billion euros worth of Russian fossil fuels in 2024. Meanwhile, they only sent 18.7 billion euros in aid to Ukraine. So Europe literally gave more money to Russia than to Ukraine. Let that sink in for a moment. And this isn't just about money. Russian shadow tankers, vessels specifically designed to evade sanctions, transported 61% of Russia's seaborne oil exports. 558 shadow vessels carried oil worth 83 billion euros. The EU knows about this. They see it happening, and they do nothing effective to stop it. The European Commission keeps announcing grand plans to phase out Russian energy by 2027, but it's all smoke and mirrors. Countries like Germany continue buying Russian LNG through other European ports. They call it whitewashing, basically money laundering for Russian gas. The lack of transparency in EU gas markets makes this deception incredibly easy. And now listen carefully. Despite all the sanctions and tough talk, pipeline imports from Russia continue flowing through the Turk Stream pipeline. Even after Ukraine stopped transit in January, the EU is still averaging 56 million cubic meters per day of Russian gas. That's actually an 11% monthly increase. What's truly sickening is that Slovakia and Hungary are actively lobbying to resume gas transit through Ukraine. These countries are literally trying to increase Russian gas imports, while their own soldiers might one day face Russian weapons bought with European money. The moral bankruptcy here is complete. Here's the bottom line that nobody wants to admit. European leaders know exactly what they're doing. They make tough speeches about standing with Ukraine, then quietly funnel billions to Putin's war chest. They're playing both sides, hoping nobody notices the contradiction. But we notice. We see through their lies. Subscribe now, because the next story we cover might hit even closer to home, and you need to understand how deep this corruption goes. Yesterday's meeting between Trump, Zelensky, and European leaders in Washington perfectly captured this hypocrisy. After Trump's Alaska summit with Putin, European leaders rushed to Washington, pretending they have Ukraine's back. But these are the same leaders whose countries keep buying Russian energy. German Chancellor Merz, French President Macron, British Prime Minister Starmer. They all sat around that table talking about security guarantees for Ukraine while their economies remain addicted to Russian fossil fuels. Trump even called Putin during the meeting to arrange future talks. The whole thing was theater, while the real business continues as usual. But here's what gives me hope. More people are waking up to this deception every day. Americans are seeing through the European double game. Citizens across Europe are demanding real action, not just empty promises. The truth always comes out eventually, and we're here to make sure it comes out faster. We're not just reporting news here. We're exposing the lies that mainstream media won't touch. Every subscribe, every like, every comment helps us reach more people who deserve to know what's really happening. The establishment media won't tell you that Europe is funding both sides of this war. They won't explain how Germany's military buildup actually makes them weaker. But we will. Because the truth matters more than their comfortable narratives. Because the people of Ukraine deserve better than this hypocrisy. Because you deserve to know how your leaders really operate when they think nobody's watching. This isn't just about Europe. It's about holding power accountable everywhere. So hit that subscribe button, share this video, and let's keep building a community that demands honesty from our leaders. Because the next story we uncover might be even more shocking than what we've revealed today.